Hello and welcome back to the How the Race Was Won podcast. I'm Dane Cash, and it's Olympic time, bike racing analyst extraordinaire Cosmo Catalano. What do you think of that?
I try not to think that hard of it.
Are you able to enjoy it somewhat? I know you don't love the Olympics.
Yeah, no, totally. I actually, as we'll talk about, I think the TTs, and especially the men's TT, was one of the most enjoyable time trials I've seen in a long time. I mean, saying something. The good ones don't come along that often.
Yeah, it's a discipline that can be boring, but this one wasn't, for sure. Let's just real quickly let you, the listeners, know what we're going to talk about. So obviously, with the Olympics going on, the Tour de France over, we are at a part of the year, and with the biggest race of the season still coming, of course, we're at a part of the year, the Vuelta, where, we might have fewer things to talk about than we did during the Tour, obviously. However, the TTs were pretty interesting. So we're going to do some breakdown of the action in the TT, most of the men's side. We will take some questions. I asked folks in our Discord server, in our the How the Race Is Won channel of our Discord server, to throw some questions our way. We've got some good ones, and we'll field some questions, and they're all bike racing related from people who are pretty serious about bike racing, as you'd imagine. And then we will preview the upcoming road race action, because as of today, when we're recording Sunday night here in the U.S., that's less than a week away. And on the bright side, I think we'll have more tactical analysis coming out of that, just because it is a road race.
This was a fairly tactical time trial.
Really, Cosmo Catalano, bike racing analyst extraordinaire. Well, tell us all about it. First of all, what's the headline from the men's individual time trial at the Paris Olympics?
Oh, we welcome our new Remco Evenepoel overlords. I mean, this was about as big a statement I think as Remco has ever made. Yes, there was no Vinigo, yes, there was no Pogacar, but this was a race of truth. Granted, in kind of drizzly conditions, but he showed up, he delivered, he didn't make any mistakes. His race was low drama, and he won convincingly by a convincing margin. And it wasn't ever. I don't think nail biting is the right word. But it was close. You were watching every time check, wondering what he was going to do, wondering if he'd make a mistake in every corner. It was good, solid program.
Interestingly enough, he was the last starter, and he is the world champion in the discipline. Obviously, Remco Evenepoel is good at time trialing. I would go so far, even before this, I think we said on this show, I know Kaylee said at one point, that he's probably the best time trialist in the world. That said, he was not the bookmaker's favorite coming into this event, which I think is pretty surprising.
It's sizeism. I think that's what it is.
He was significantly shorter than the other two folks on the podium. I can tell you that.
Sizeism.
However,
support
it. The bookies generally, the other riders that they liked, Remco is one of them, but they all performed pretty well, and it was pretty close to what I think most people expected. That the riders who contended for the win were kind of the pre-race favorites. If you read the preview over at escapecollective.com, great website, you would have known that yours truly expected it to be either Evenepoel, Philippe Ogana, or Josh Tarling. And it was Evenepoel, Philippe Ogana, and Wout van Aert on the podium. And one wonders whether Tarling might have been on the podium over Van Aert had he not punctured. But yeah, Josh Tarling had a puncture, and early on in his effort, still had a great ride. It's still really impressive what he was able to do. But yeah, one wonders whether he might have been on the podium had he not had to deal with an early puncture. Well, let's get to how it was won. How was the TT won? And yeah, well, shoot off whatever analysis you got. It's honestly, it's a TT. I feel like we don't have to spend too much time. I mean, do we need to break down who was in the hot seat?
I didn't go through every corner with a fine-tooth comb as I sometimes do, because I think it's really interesting to see how people approach a course like this. This was really a great showcase of what a time trial can be. All too often, time trials end up being somebody tucked into a little ball, pedaling hard along a nondescript road, and one guy puts up more watts than another guy or gal or what have you. And at the end of the day, they went faster. And it's like, okay, cool. And there was a lot of different stuff going on. You had bad weather. You had a very tight, sheltered urban course. So you didn't have a ton of wind exposure. Van Aert started with two disc wheels, a disc wheel in the front and a disc wheel in the back, which just looks ludicrous. It seems ludicrous. And he rode really well on it.
it's just a random aside, but like it's funny that it looks and is ludicrous because like if you're outside of the sport, if you've never seen it before, the idea of mismatching wheel types seems ludicrous to me. I feel like if you've never seen it before and you see like why the heck is that one wheel this way and the other wheel that way, as in the way that everybody always does it. But yeah, yes, obviously this is weird. That's not something you usually see.
Yeah, well, I think even just riding a bike slowly, casual bike riders, they know that the front wheel turns, right? And so when some wind hits the front wheel, it moves the bike around a lot. And if too much wind hits it, it becomes basically unrideable, which I think is why people don't usually run a front disc.
Yeah, you don't really want to have a sail there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just saying, I think if you've never seen it before, I think it's funny to see what they are normally on. But yeah, I guess Van Aert, and also, on that note, I wonder how much he gained or lost with this decision. I mean, we'll never know.
He was probably the second red group in quotation marks rider to go after Tarling. And so he was setting fastest times through most of the day because Tarling, as we know earlier in the course, he had a front flat, soft front tire, pulled over, did a quick bike change, still lost a lot of time. And really to his credit, got back into his rhythm. Like he was making up time from the point where he had to get serviced to the point where he crossed the finish line. I thought it was over the second he got pulled over to the barricades on the side of the course. And he really recovered well, which doesn't always happen. I think we saw a lot of people crash and not be able to get back into their rhythm all day long. He didn't crash, but still stopping, getting off the bike, getting the new bike. That completely, I mean, a time trial, you are at your limit and you're just trying to pin it right there. It's like you're driving a car and you're trying to make the tachometer be in exactly the same spot the entire time. So any disruption of that you're not expecting is just throws your whole day off.
I think it speaks to how good he is and why he was seen as such a favorite beforehand, or at least a favorite beforehand, is because he was able to still come out and nearly end up on the podium, nearly medaled, even with the puncture. Right, so Tarling, Van Aert setting fast times, Van Aert looking like he was doing a great ride, and he did. But I think there was a general sense of what will Filippo Ganna and Remco Evenepoel do? And were the two,
and I mean,
yeah, that's it.
We got Ganna out on course, and I mean he's just such a presence on the bike. Like even they do his intermediate speed checks. They had the production team had some graphics up that would helpfully indicate the rider, which is weird because it's a time trial. There's only one rider on the screen at a time. We don't need him spot shadowed, but also have their speed. And it really seemed like every time you saw Ganna, granted he was up to speed, he wasn't coming out of a corner going into a corner when he had these timestamps on him. It seemed to be going very, very fast, but also doesn't love the rain, and it showed. There was a lot of hesitation, a lot of line checking. At one point, he kind of ping-ponged off those barriers with the diagonal or pyramidal feet. It managed to keep it upright. Great save.
That was sketch.
I mean, it was horrifying. It was sort of like you first saw it and you wanted him to crash or slide out almost immediately, so that the seemingly inevitable crash wouldn't be worse. Fortunately, he didn't go down. He kept it upright. It definitely cost him a couple seconds, but it was not like a make or break type of scenario. And he came in the end, 10 seconds ahead of Van Aert.
I do wonder, if that maybe crash, or if that like near miss, let's call it, even if that didn't have the impact of being the make or break moment, the fact that he was riding in maybe a state of general discomfort or displeasure at the conditions, that in and of itself might have had an impact.
I mean, he said immediately after the race, everybody knows I don't like the rain that much.
Yeah.
And taking that into account, I mean, not only was it rainy and twisty, but there were all sorts of different road surfaces. Like this was on city streets in the middle of Paris. I don't know if you've been to Paris. It is a very old city. So there is, kind of modern tarmac. There's chip seal. There's cobblestones. All this stuff, even though it's been raining for a while, like you could still see kind of dirt and grit and grease, just stuff that had been, stuffed down into the gaps between the cobbles, kind of coming up as all the rain got on the course. It really didn't feel like a situation you get in the U.S. where like it starts to rain, the road is really slippery, and then everything runs off the side of the road, and the road surface, while wet, still has a good amount of grip. This seemed like every single piece of this course had its own coefficient of friction, like its own ideal speed. I think especially in the women's race, we saw a lot of people struggling. Coming into corners, they were fine. They just scratched a bunch of speed. But finding that moment when you're exiting the corner where you could really start to put down power again. I could swear I saw more people lose the rear wheel as they started to apply power than I did lose the front wheel just coming in too hot.
And it's something that is maybe, I don't know if underrated is the right word, but like it's a key part of bike racing generally that I think if you're a viewer, you think about more in terms of like the classics riders, like being able to ride in that kind of weather. That's what, that's a make or break thing for so many classics riders. But like, obviously it's going to be important in any rainy time trial as well. And you just don't often think about it as much. But Remco, the eventual winner, seemed to be doing just fine.
Yeah. I mean, he was, I get, like, he looked better, I think, than he looked in any of the Tour time trials. I think he looked really uncomfortable in a couple of them. I think he
won a Tour time trial.
Yeah, but he didn't look like, he didn't win the final time trial.
He didn't win. That's right. He didn't. He wasn't even second.
And he didn't look, I don't think he looked at his best maybe he didn't use Vindigo now in the first time trial.
Oh, but we talked about this during the Tour show, how you thought that Remco didn't look great even though he did win the first TT. And then in the second one, he didn't look great and didn't. Yeah. So yeah. But he seemed fine with the weather. He didn't have any issues with the crashing. He just, at the end of the day, it was a pretty comprehensive win. And the other question in any time trial is the pacing. And it seemed like he nailed that as well. There was at no point as you watched his splits, it was a general progression towards the ultimate, gap that he had. It wasn't like he was coming out super hot and then, oh, wow, he actually didn't do so hot in this next split. It was the whole time. He just seemed to be perfectly pacing himself. Well, that's just an important part of being a time trialist.
The top four were substantially, there was a big gap. Like the top three finished within 30 seconds, and then there was an over 30-second gap to McNulty. And kind of the rest of the field.
Yeah.
So you could feel the it was great to see everybody go out and experience the Olympic thing, but there were very clearly a small handful of top contenders for this event. And,
I hate
delivered.
I kind of hate to do this, but like also I kind of want to, which is like, again, I wrote the preview and I did a very rare thing, and then I decided not to put anyone in the 4-star tier because I thought it was so clear that there were 3 guys who were going to be contesting this. I gave Wout 3 stars, and that was the only rider that I gave 3 stars to. And I felt, again, I feel kind of bad doing it, but I felt pretty vindicated when seeing the final podium was those 2 of those 3 guys minus the one who punctured. And Van Aert was the other one on the podium. And then it was, like you said, it was a pretty significant gap back to everyone else. And that just speaks to the nature of time trialing. Like, if it's Flanders or Roubaix, it's hard to say who's going to be on the podium. But in a time trial, like, okay, yeah, the rain injects some intrigue, but nobody's surprising comes out of nowhere to win a time trial. That's not to say that you don't sometimes get upsets. Like, Tobias Foss winning a world championship was an upset. But, like, he's not a nobody. You don't get randos in a race like this. And that's what we got here was pretty much what we expected. Women's side, any big takeaways from you?
Not huge. It was cool that the women did the same exact course as the men. I think the women had worse conditions.
I thought so too. Rainier.
But we still saw, good riders. Don Tratnik, who did have a crash, lost in quotation marks to Grace Brown. As did Binyam Girmay, but he wasn't there he was more or less opening the legs for the road race. Eurosport actually tracked him down for an interview after the event. They're like, "You're not really a time trial specialist." He's like, "Yeah, but
he looked cool though.
He looked real cool.
I liked his kit. Yeah, the victory of Grace Brown, second huge win this year for her, and it speaks to something that we kind of talked about this before the show, but. The rider who won the women's time trial in these horrible conditions, because it was raining harder in the women's race, you tend to think of riders from Belgium and like the UK and rainy places.
We had a rider from the UK
thriving in the rain,
entirely surprisingly up on the podium, but like I think she had a really good ride.
Yeah, but
and we're still 90 seconds back, like a minute and a half. So yeah, Grace Brown. I don't know what she does to get used to steering the bike in the water, but holy cow, she is good at it.
Yeah, and it was a pretty dominant performance from her. I mean, Chloe Dygert was an example of, well, actually, the Americans had...
maybe I can do 30 seconds complaining about the Americans.
Feel free.
So the way Taylor Knibb, who is a triathlete, got into this time trial was by winning the time trial at U.S. Nationals. And I'm actually a big fan of bake-off racing. Everybody shows up. The winner, the best performer, gets to go to gets the entry to the Olympics. The problem is, you couldn't have picked a less. I guess maybe you could have had it be an uphill time trial. That would have been less different. But the U.S. Nationals time trial in Charleston, West Virginia, was along a river. There were no corners like there were on this race course. You did have to turn around at two separate points because it was out and back along a river in a straight line. It was an absolute. It was just awful in terms of getting an athlete who was going to perform on this course. And Abby Mickey, in conversation with me, has said, yeah, but who else were they going to bring? And it's true. Like there are. It wasn't like a situation where you had two or three top people trying to fight their way in. Like, I love Kristen Faulkner. She is not a great bike handler in conditions like this. She's gotten a lot better. I give her full credit for that, but she wasn't going to have a huge performance this day. But at the same time, like, maybe there's another rider in the U.S. who has that great combination of power and bike handling, and we just don't know yet. And maybe they were at U.S. Nationals and they never got a chance to display how well they could do on this course. And even if they were going to finish, in the 20s or the 30s in this time trial, like, that's a start at the Olympics. That's a big deal for any athlete. And to have USA Cycling handing out an Olympic starting spot for a course that Taylor Knibb had no business being on really kind of upsets me. I think they could have done a much better job than they did. And again, it's not about Taylor. She had a lot of crashes. Even her mechanic fell down.
Yeah, that was very like Benny Hill to watch that.
I mean, it shows how slippery the road is,
yeah.
right? Like, a lot of the riders would crash and you'd see them get up taking these ginger little steps because the road was so slick. And seeing a mechanic run out of the car and fall down because it is that slippery really, really, really nails down like what they were dealing with out on the roads there. But returning to my point, like, I just it feels very USAC to do something like this, where they did what seemed like it was easy to do for them, and it turned out to be terrible for basically every stakeholder in the process except the person who had to come up with the criteria.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, so Taylor Knibb is a extremely decorated triathlete, very good,
very strong
at triathlon,
good at putting out watts,
and watts are really important in a TT. The weather conditions could not have been worse for her.
Well, it's even then, even on a dry day, this was not a course where you got into your aerodynamic position and rode it until the end of the course.
It wasn't the most technical course either, though. There were corners, but it wasn't super technical.
But there would still be points where you would accelerate. There would still be a lot of seconds to be gained by knowing exactly how much braking to put on before a corner, kind of knowing how hard you had to accelerate out of one corner, like your acceleration distance, how long you should push as hard as you can, kind of re-accelerating the bike before you eased off and settled back into your rhythm. All these things that basically don't exist in triathlon existed on this course.
Yeah. Triathlon, generally, those efforts are very much watts. I think
that's seen as desirable especially in longer triathlons. Like, you're supposed to just be on the bike running the engine as long as you can sustain it for the race, for the distance of the race. I think it's a little bit different in sprint triathlons. I think mass start triathlons, there's actually a lot of tactics. I think in general, triathletes train to be in a position and put out their threshold wattage steadily until it's time to get off the bike and run.
Yeah, and with some corners and obviously a lot of rain, However, I mean, when you think about it, if it had rained even more, there's a point at which she does then become a favorite, right?
She would dominate, because it would turn into swimming with a bike.
That's where I'm going. Yeah,
maybe that's what USAC was going for.
Maybe they were expecting even more rain, and we just didn't get it. But yeah, in a Noah's Ark situation, Taylor Knibb could be the favorite. Yeah. Okay, that's the TTs at the Olympics. Grace Brown wins the gold on the women's side, capping off a pretty brilliant swan song season. Hard to imagine going out any better than she has this year. Yeah. Good job, Grace Brown. Winning Liège was the other, the big win. If you've forgotten that already.
Winning an entertaining Liège.
Yes, an extremely entertaining Liège. That was a great race. Yeah. And so Grace Brown, you're Olympic champion on the women's side. Remco Evenepoel, Olympic champion on the men's side.
Also a Liège winner. Not this year.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't connect those dots, but yeah, that's a fine point. And then silver medalists you had Anna Henderson and Philip Ogana, Chloe Dygert, Lafayette. All right, let's take some cues. Let's provide some A's for some cues. Over on Discord, Rich B. I like this question because it's I have serious takes here, and it's an unserious question, kind of, and I appreciate that, Rich B. How the kit design influenced who got medals and who just missed out. I'm talking graphics and not aero quality. So, I would
specific.
I would like to point out actually that I think I guess I already kind of said this, but I thought the Eritrea kit looked really cool. I thought Biniam looked awesome, and I feel like maybe he's an example of how the kit design that actually didn't really impact who got the medals, because I thought he looked really cool, and I thought Remco just looked. I don't know. I find the Belgian kit to be just kind of meh.
I will stand up for that Belgian kit.
You like the Belgian Olympic look?
So when one thinks about design, one generally Belgium is not the top country that comes to mind. There are some very famous artists from Belgium, but I think it is known for a pragmatic industrial approach to this sort of thing. I think their classic kit of light blue with the Belgian bars has been well established, and I think the kit they had this year really kind of played on that very nicely.
It did, yeah. They did mix it up a little bit. That's true. Actually, we should give them credit. It was like it was the classic blue, but they added some flair to it.
Yeah, I mean they curved it up, and it wasn't like a mess, right? It wasn't.
Yeah.
You didn't look at it and immediately see Belgium, but you sort of, if you knew cycling, you could piece it together. Be like, okay, that's Belgium. Oh, that's really cool what they did. They really kind of made this stylish, but not like horribly over stylish, kind of rococo. I really liked it, and it was cool that they had a little splash of yellow on their like track pants on one leg, which made it seem like they were all wearing one rubber boot on the podium, which was appropriate for conditions.
Do we count helmets when we're talking about this? Because if so, I feel like that introduces an extra element of negativity.
Fair. Yeah.
Remco didn't have the worst look in that department. So there's that. I don't know.
Wout had the Visma.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Wout being
the shark helmet.
Yeah, it was
like it looks kind of like the. I was when he set that first fast time. I was like, you know what? Maybe this is the shark helmet's moment. Maybe this is the double discs and the shark helmet. This is the day where they come through.
I mean, he did get a medal.
He did get a medal, but he didn't win.
He didn't win.
He didn't win, and it is tough to say that he had that he didn't have a great ride, because he did have a really good ride. I think it didn't come through as he seemed to think he took a lot of chances. I don't know if it came through as well in the broadcast coverage.
Yeah.
But again, it's really hard to tell, right? It's not like a mountain bike race or a cross race where you see somebody like two-wheel sliding. You're like, oh man, that person's going to die.
Right.
And then they ride it out. We did see that with Ghana. I think there is a sense that only the rider on the bicycle knows when they're at that very edge of traction. When you're there, you kind of feel it, and it's super uncomfortable. I think Wout was feeling it a lot when he's out there.
In terms of, you mentioned with Belgium, like you don't look at it and see Belgium unless you're into cycling, and then that sort of changes it.
Or if you're Belgium, if you know what the national kit.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like
their soccer team is the Red Devils. They have a totally different getup.
Right. And well, that's the thing. There are several countries, the Netherlands and Australia come to mind, where the kit for their national sporting teams has nothing to do with their flag. And you need to know sports to know that. Like if you just tune in and you don't watch sports, then you're going to wonder why Australia is not the colors of their flag. I actually really did like the Dutch look, the very bold orange. I mean, nothing too like out of the ordinary about it.
The Italian and Dutch kits seemed like the straight ahead.
I was just gonna say
these are the national kits we always bring.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, maybe it's just because I like those colors. There's nothing design wise taking chances about Philip Ogana's kit, but it looked good to me. So, this question's from Toops. In important races, we're seeing the same faces appear at the pointy ends. Aside from the passage of time, are there ways race organizers can vary courses to have more riders able to contend? Or is training and scouting now so detailed that we'll always see those same riders? So I would actually, Toops, my thought here is, and Cosmo, feel free to weigh in, I actually don't think we're seeing an inordinately small number of faces at the top end. Like we talk about a quote unquote big six. We've talked about that a fair bit on this show. We talked about the placeholders, but like six is a lot. It's not. It's not like it's two guys or three guys. And I think there's one of those six, literally just one of them, who is capable of winning most races on the calendar, and not all because he hasn't done Roubaix yet. And the rest of them, Pogacar he looms large here.
Has Remco done Roubaix?
No, but
has he threatened to do Roubaix?
I don't think Remco. I mean, Remco, he hasn't even won like Flanders yet, right? So that's like a next level. Like Pogacar is the only one who's even close to being there.
It's a progression here.
The rest of them, I mean, Remco and Roglic, both of them great one-day racers at what they do. Both good in the Ardennes. Remco, excellent time trialist, but like that's what they do. They don't also contend at Flanders and Roubaix. They're not winning sprints. Like and then Vingegaard, he's pretty clearly a Grand Tour guy. That's what and 1 weeks. That's what he does. He's also not really doing the classics. Then Van der Poel, for as brilliant as he is a classics guy who can win a handful of Grand Tour stages. That's what he does. He's not going out and contending for the Grand Tour. So I think that's other than Pogacar looming large as this force that can win almost anything, I think in general, the number of riders we have is pretty similar to, say, I don't know, I'm thinking like mid-2010s. It's like Froome, Nibali, and Contador win most stage races. And Cancellara, Bonin, Sagan were winning most one-day races. I think that's a pretty similar number of riders doing their thing at that level. I guess, Philipsen in the sprints, but also Girmay this year. And, Philipsen's not so dominant. Certainly not as dominant as Cav has been or Kittel. I don't know. I guess I just don't feel like it's that few.
I think there was a real sense, like the thing that I got after the Olympic time trial was sort of like, oh, hey, Remco got the win he didn't get last week. But also the two dudes who beat him weren't there. So, like, I definitely had that sense of, like, this is sort of, there is a small subset of people in those two data points. It did sort of feel like this part of this win may have been the absence of the other two. But at the same time, like, I think you're right. I think we do have a pretty broad selection of people out here winning races and being race favorites.
This could be splitting hairs, but I think at most it was the absence of one. I don't think Vingegaard podiums in this. I think Pogacar might have, but I don't think Vingegaard takes a medal at the Olympic TT. I think Vingegaard's really, really, really good in a TT in a Grand Tour. Outside of that, that's not really, and especially when there's climbing involved. But still, I mean, all that said, Toops, we could also still try to answer your question, which is, are there ways race organizers can vary courses to have more riders able to contend? And I think the answer to that is yes, they can do that. But I also don't know that. So I think the way that you do that is you make Grand Tours less mountainous, at least in terms of the stage races of this equation. And therefore you can inject a little bit more chance into it. You have more opportunities for a Julien Alaphilippe style, the year that he was in contention at the Tour. But I also don't know I don't know that that's what people want. At a certain point, I think people still want the Galibier and Tourmalet and
The Tour is tough too because there's so many different, like you get a sort of law of averages. I don't know if I'm using the right statistical terminology. You have a lot of different randomnesses happening on any given day. There's X amount of randomness in a bike race. But over time, the effect of that randomness, the amplitude of the difference is in results get evened out. And you really end up with, short of somebody crashing out, you end up with kind of like that median result over the whole race, which is more likely to be a race favorite. Right. Say a one-day race like Roubaix, where anything can go wrong, and it goes wrong.
I mean, one thing about the Grand Tour stars at any given moment that makes them the stars, that makes them so good, that helps them get their results, is those riders tend to be extraordinarily consistent. They don't have epic collapses. They don't horribly flame out on this or that day or this or that terrain. And that means that even if, you vary up the terrain of a race over 3 weeks, those riders are going to be the ones who are always up there. And then, I do think varying the terrain could maybe make the difference with a rider like Vingegaard, though. Like a less high mountain tour, he's not going to like that as much. Pogacar, I guess I should point out, for what I said in terms of how you could shake things up, I don't think any amount of shaking up is going to make him not a potential winner. I mean, unless you make the tour 21 sprint stages. Even then,
21
even then, he still might win the tour.
Roubaix. That would be interesting. How he would do in a Grand Tour that was basically Tour of Wallonie, right? Like there was a small stage race they just had in Belgium that is like kind of hilly, kind of sprinty, no big mountains, no huge time trials, and yeah, if you had 20 days of that, how would Pogacar do relative to the field? Would he be a contender? That's an interesting question.
I think one of the things that makes him so good, and generally this is true of all Grand Tour riders, is that they know how to not lose a ton of time.
Right, but if there are 3 sprint days, someone wins all 3 of those sprints, that's 30 bonus seconds.
Yeah, if there's 3, but if there's 21, then the guy that's winning 20 of those stages could have a bad day and not like he won't even be in like the 5 minutes of the stage winner.
It's interesting. I would actually be really curious to see somebody put together a Grand Tour with no big mountains and with no time trials.
I'd be curious. I wouldn't think it would be fun to watch, but I'd be curious to know what would happen.
Yeah.
All right. Good question, Toops. Sasha, feels like Decathlon particularly and FDJ have had a great year until they laid an egg at the Tour de France. Is that just chance? Bad team choice? Misguided goals? Just outgunned? I know it's been discussed a little, but mostly as a what a PR disaster and not why it happened. So, much like with Toops' question, I want to push back on at least an element of this, one half of it. I don't think FDJ has had a great year up until the Tour. I think Decathlon has. Decathlon was winning a lot right up until the Tour. And even when they weren't winning, they were doing, things that caught our attention. As a part of all of that, if you look at like the team rankings over at PCS, which is as good as any team ranking place, Decathlon is solidly in the top 10, I think, right now. And Groupama is 12th. And Decathlon's 5th. Okay, on PCS rankings as of Sunday night, Decathlon has a bevy of World Tour wins this year. They won a stage at the Giro. 2 stages at the Giro, 2 stages in Romandy. FDJ, not so much. I think FDJ's been kind of unimpressive. Like Lawrence Pithy won the Seagore, Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road Race, and then they won a stage at Basque Country, and that's it. So, okay. Pointing out, before we even answer this question, yes, Decathlon's had a good year. FDJ, middling. Right. I think both teams went into the race with not horrible plans. And neither one executed on their mediocre plans. I think Decathlon went in thinking they could get something out of Sam Bennett. And I love Sam Bennett. I've had really great interactions personally with Sam in my journalistic career. But I think it's fair to say that he had a tour that he was disappointed in, and so was the team. They got very little out of Bennett. And other than that, we talked about this a fair bit, but like it's so hard to do anything at the tour if you're not one of like 5 teams. The 3 teams that were on the GC podium and then the 2 teams that split the 6 sprint stages between them. EF was one of the few that actually managed to do something.
There were other teams that did well throughout the course of the tour, especially in the first week. You had teams that raced very aggressively with Romain Bardet, right?
I was just going to mean, one of those teams had a rider who was the standard bearer of this team for...
Right. And I mean, he is like nominally a GC rider, but not really. And he knows he's not, right? He knows he's not going to win the Tour de France. He knows he's probably not going to win a mountain stage at the Tour de France. He tried. He put in a really good effort, but he knows that is a low likelihood outcome. And he rode like it. He rode like a guy who was going to take every chance he got and try to really do something with it. And I think Decathlon and I think also Groupama feel this sort of pressure with less so Decathlon this year. I think you're right on it with Sam Bennett and just not having a great tour. But they didn't, it was almost like they didn't hedge that. Like they didn't have a plan to be like, hey, we're going to take this chance. You think of all the teams that were like, oh, hey, we targeted this stage starting this. Like we knew this was a great opportunity for us to get in the break. We knew this finish really suited this one rider on our team. There was this very clear outline of like the chances they were going to take, the shots they were going to take, the people that are going to get in the moves. And like David Gaudu was in breakaways and just riding like a guy who was trying to be the most prominent Frenchman in the breakaway, or the last rider caught in the breakaway. And like, great, that is somewhat entertaining. It gets the sponsor on TV, but it doesn't get good results, right? Like, I think there wasn't the concerted effort that we saw from Lotto Destiny or from DSM or from even Archaea to really just take the chances, make the moves. They didn't have like plan Bs.
Well, I think the other I think it's kind of hard for us to know what the plans were because regardless of what the plans were, they also didn't have the form. I mean, they were not there. Neither of these teams like had the form. They just weren't able to contend with not even the Pogačar's winning the single Pogačar winning so many stages, but like some of these breakaway days, they just weren't there. Felix Gall was the guy for Decathlon for the mountains, and he really disappointed. I think
he hasn't been having a great year.
14th overall. They
probably could have figured that out coming in. I don't know.
And maybe therefore planned around it. But with them, I mean, they had Bennett and Gall, and neither one of them performed. Groupama had Gaudu, they had Valentin Madouas, they had Lenny Martinez. I think was a late addition to the roster, but the form just does not seem to have been there for either one of these teams. And yeah, they didn't do what EF did, which is adjust, change the approach. I mean, maybe EF was going for polka dots from the very beginning. Who knows? But either way, they managed to pull it off because they had both form and planning. Neither one of these teams did. In Decathlon's case, yes, it's the Tour and they're a French team, and so this is a big deal. It's a big miss. However, at least they can fall back on the other things they've done this year. In Groupama's case, what can they fall back on? Like, this is, it's a rough year for this team. Gaudu,
They're all kind of like on welfare, right? Like, no matter what they do, they're going to go to the Tour because they're World Tour teams. They're going to get attention because they're French teams. Like, there isn't, I don't know. Maybe I've been Tour de France Unchained too hard, but like, just every time Marc Madio comes on the screen, I'm like, this is why you guys aren't as good as you should be at bike racing, because you've got this dude just spouting truisms and like broad sweeping emotional statements instead of being like, hey, this rider puts out these watts in this kind of condition. They ride really well on these climbs. Let's try to get them in a breakaway on this day. It seems like it really suits them. It's like that. None of that seems to be there. And until it is, I think we can keep seeing the same level of futility, and maybe occasionally they pull off a win and it's dramatic and they love it so much, but like, they should be winning more races than they do with the riders there.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, last question. Adam Q. Remco had a great first Tour, and winning the TDF is obviously a big career goal. How does he map out the next few years of his career / tackle future TDFs to beat Pogačar and Vingegaard? I mean, if we actually had an answer to this question, I feel like we could make money off of it.
Yeah, I walk up to Pat Lefevre with a briefcase full of the answer to this question. And
I mean, I think there are some general things he can try to do. However, I think there are things that he might not want to do because I don't know that they're foolproof. Like, I think if Remco wants to really and truly try to contend for the Tour, he probably needs to shift his focus towards being a better climber in the high mountains. Because the other way that he wins the Tour is not going to happen, which is that ASO just designs a Tour that's all about the long, flat time trials.
ASO takes the 2002 Tour exactly kilometer for kilometer, plots it out for 2026 or whatever the next Tour that they're going to put out, route they're going to put out is. I think Remco has a shot.
I'm looking up how many TT, kilometers.
I believe there were 2 TTs and a team time trial.
Yeah, so there's a short opening TT, a prologue, you can call it. A 67K team time trial. God, that's buddy. Boring. 52K individual, and then a 50K individual. Man, that's a lot of time trial.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And since that's not going to happen, I think he could probably try to shift his focus towards the high mountains because that's where they beat him. I mean, that's where he's at a disadvantage to Pogačar and Vingegaard, despite the best efforts of Mikel Landa. He's nice. He's got some punch. He's fine in the hills, but like once you get to the really high mountains, that's where he can lose a lot of time. And just because of physics, that's where anyone can lose a lot of time. However, if he does shift his focus, his training, if he just starts spending all his time at altitude, then he risks losing a step in the areas where he is such a good rider that I don't know that it's worth it to try this because I don't know that it's going to work. Like, let's say Remco just decides, you know what, I don't care about Liège. I don't care about winning Classica San Sebastian for the 87th time. And I'm even going to maybe try to shift my training, possibly even my body type, to be a better climber. Well, then maybe he doesn't win the Olympic gold and win the world championship in the time trial anymore. And I'm not saying he's going to suddenly be bad at that, but he might just be a silver medalist type rider. And I don't know that he wants to risk getting away from those things that he's so darn good at. And that I've banging the drum about this all the time. Don't think he gets enough credit for doing. I don't know that he wants to risk that. I don't know. What do you think?
For the zillionth time, I came into the tour pretty Remco bearish, and I came out a big Remco booster. I think he has a lot of ceiling between. There's a lot of. I don't think he's anywhere near his ceiling in terms of time.
That's true.
I think the way he rode in this year's Tour in the Mountains was the best I've ever seen him ride the mountains, and not in a that super sketchy sort of way, but in a he's making smart decisions. He seems really comfortable. I think Landa was just. I think that was huge. I think that put him in a totally different space in terms of where he was in the mountains and the way he rode in the mountains. And maybe it's getting another guy like Landa, getting a team, trying to poach some people off the back of the maybe super secret UAE internal team drama, like Juan Ayuso or somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think getting a more, nothing against Louis Vervaeke and Vin Wilder, who have been supporting him in the mountains so far, but those aren't guys who are there in the final 8 on a mountain.
Right.
And you find him a Sean Yates or something that could be
the impact that those riders can have because of the fact that Evenepoel can actually take time in a time trial, which is, again, we said this already, but not a lot of riders can do that. Not a lot of riders can take time on Pogacar or Vingegaard in a time trial. If he can get teammates around him who can help him not lose that much time because they're able to help pace him, give him whatever small drafting advantage he can get on a long but maybe not incredibly steep climb, whatever it is, then he actually can use his team in a way that keeps him in the race. Because then as soon as you get those TTs, he actually can regain some time, maybe claw. Yeah, so maybe Lefebvre invests a little bit more in more domestiques, but then again, even for Lefebvre, this is a tough call because then he's spending his money on these things and not on Flanders, and that's what the fans want. I
don't, I joked this spring that the kids won't know this, but Quick Step used to be a classics team. I think that is a work in progress, and I think it maybe part of it is selling the idea to a potential mountain domestique that, hey, this is a real, you can be on a team of a guy who's a real tour threat. We're organized, we're focused, we can do this stuff.
Yeah. All that said, I personally don't, as it stands right now, I think he still has a long way to go to beat Pogacar and Vingegaard. That's not to say he can't do it. And I think I've said, this is a talking point I bring up sometimes. Nibali winning a tour, I think, is a great example of how the third guy can win. He certainly can win. But
people crash, people get sick.
Yeah.
Things happen.
I think he's still got a little ways to go. All right. Good cues. Thanks, folks. Thanks to Rich B, Toops, Sasha, and Adam Q. Last talking point, the upcoming road race in Paris.
Course in Ligne, I believe. Cours in Ligne? I don't know.
It is that.
That's how you say it.
Yeah, it's the word français. Something like it's and it's an interesting one in that it is. I look at it and I'm reminded a little bit of E3. I mean, the Tour of Flanders. Maybe Dwars is is a better. It's not quite as hard as the Tour of Flanders. There is Pave, actually. So they're going to be largely, in terms of the mileage or kilometerage, to the west of Paris. But then they finish in this circuit in Paris, finishing along the Seine. And they do 3 trips up a short, but not super steep, but not nothing, climb in Montmartre that has cobblestones. And it's the kind of course that will almost certainly be too hard for the pure sprinters, but it is not a pure climber course either. All told, it's what's the distance on this thing here? That's 273K from from Paris to Paris. They finished in Trocadero. And yeah, the Côte de la Butte Montmartre, which is 1K at 6.5%, to me is just a very, and it's cobbled, very classics style kind of course.
Having walked up to the top of Montmartre from the subway station, it's big.
Yeah, I don't think they climb the whole thing.
They don't come in on the metro and ride up the stairs.
Yeah, which like that has like there's like a car. Like you could take a what do they call that thing? A rail based thing that pulls you to the top. Yeah, but it is a big
funicular.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. They're not going to go up the whole thing, but they go up a part of it.
It's a steep climb. Yeah. It's a steep hill, and there aren't a lot of ways up it that aren't steep. And it's old, right? It's not like, a course where you're riding on, it's cobbles. It's like you said, the spring classics.
Yeah, very classic-y. And therefore, it should be not at all surprising to listeners that the pre-race favorite with the odds makers is the guy that won some of the classics this year, Mathieu van der Poel. I'd say he's shorter even than I expected with the bookies, but I do think he's a pretty clear favorite on this course. It really suits his characteristics. It's like hard enough for him, but not hard enough for the likes of an Evenepoel or Alaphilippe to be the top favorites. That's not to say they might not be there, but yeah, Van der Poel, your top favorite. I think Van Aert, Peterson are neck and neck there. Remco Evenepoel getting a lot of love from the bookies. I don't know if the course is hard enough for him, and he's going to have to try to get away on one of the climbs. But the thing that he has going for him that a lot of the other riders don't is that he has Wout van Aert in his team. And so if you're Evenepoel or if you're maybe Alaphilippe, the fact that you have a Van Aert or in Alaphilippe's case, Christophe Laporte, to finish things off for you, that gives you the ability to kind of go on the attack and see what can stick. Van der Poel doesn't have that. There's really no other Dutch rider who's like even close to being Van der Poel's level. So he is the very clear Dutch guy, whereas the teams like the Belgium and France have a few options. Still even as well for Belgium. And then it would be really cool, Biniam Girmay, in terms of being the only guy from his team that is going to be drawing attention. But this is a course that he could do something on. He's a former Gent-Wevelgem winner, and in terms of sprinty types who can hang on, he's got to be near the top of that list. Him and Wout van Aert, Mats Peterson, Michael Matthews, the other one for Australia.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because unlike Worlds, you don't have the top team bringing 1 million people. I think the most any national team in this race has is 4 riders.
Yep.
Over a long race, that makes a huge difference. I think you have a lot of like Biniam Girmay types who are the only rider from their country, and they're very strong. But it's going to be tough they don't have any way to leverage team tactics because they don't have a team.
And we've seen in Olympic races in years past, it's hard to predict. This is true of Worlds too, I think. When you're racing with I love the way that you have described this in the past, Cosmo. It's like you get a high school reunion with that class, when those are your teammates. It's so different from racing with, if you're Van Aert and Laporte, the Visma crew. You're suddenly racing with a whole different crew. And it's really hard to predict. And, Greg Van Avermaet was not the favorite. He was not expected, I think, to win in Rio. And Richard Carapaz is definitely not expected to win in Tokyo. It's not like these are randos who are winning. Van Avermaet is a monument winner. Carapaz is a Grand Tour winner. They're not coming out of left field. But there were riders who were kind of second or third tier favorites in their years. And it's certainly possible that somebody could overhaul Van der Poel, Van Aert, Peterson by taking advantage of the fact that it'll be really hard to control. And I think everyone's going to look to Belgium. And this is sort of the other side of that coin. Everyone's going to look to Belgium to control this race because they do have numbers insofar as you can have numbers at the Olympics.
I think you're going to see a rider with a lot of versatility. Someone who can ride alone if they have to ride alone for a long time. Someone who can sprint, who can go uphill. Obviously that's kind of stating the obvious, but at the same time, Mathieu van der Poel won a big criterium when he took Worlds last year. There wasn't all that much of a sense of being in a road race where you are out there in the break, turning mad watts. There's a lot of just accelerating on the corners, which he's really good at. I kind of like Pedersen more than anyone else.
I think he's kind of a wild card just because of the crash of the tour. We don't know what his kind of.
Well, that's the thing. It's the form we don't.
Yeah.
If he was coming in smoking hot off the tour, I would be like, here's some money that I will bet on this. But.
Yeah. Whereas with Van Aert, I think we've gotten proven. We've seen proven evidence that like he's in shape. He is in good enough shape to have medaled at the TT. And I think with Van der Poel, I'm pretty much assuming that he's in pretty much flying form. He started to look good towards the end of the tour. This is a big goal.
Still a little tired. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know. We'll see.
I'm sure we'll talk plenty more about the women's race, but in terms of favorites for that, Lada Kopecky is your favorite, but it's really tricky with Marianne Vos being also in this race. And then Lorena Wiebes, Demi Vollering. It could be another case of Lada Kopecky versus the Netherlands. And the fun thing is that, well, maybe not fun for her, but a lot of these riders are her teammates most of the year. But at races like the Olympics and Worlds, she has to go up against Demi Vollering, Lorena Wiebes. Yeah, the Dutch juggernaut. And then Lisa Longo Borghini looking good at the moment as well. Could be a good race, and hopefully you'll hear more of this on Wheel Talk. All right, I think that's it for us. Next time you hear from us, we will know who our new Olympic champions are. Very exciting. Congrats to those who have already done so, taken Olympic titles. We didn't talk about all the other Olympic events going on as well. Obviously, there's mountain bike and track going on as well. XC already happened. Pauline Ferrand Prevot taking gold.
I mean, it's kind of a gravel race. So.
Yeah, lots to watch this week and next. Archery coming up. Can't wait for that. Yeah.
Is there archery?
Yeah, there is.
Oh, I thought they cut archery.
No,
it's one of those. I mean, archery is awesome. Don't get me wrong.
No, it's there for sure.
Every 4 years, there's some drama.
That is true. There is often
they're getting cut.
Yeah, or like when they. Yeah, that happens actually quite frequently. But no, archery's still there.
It's almost like maybe there are too many sports for there to be an Olympics, and we should stop having it.
Ooh, hot take! Right at the end of the show, right as I'm about to say, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm Dane Cash.
Sorry.
Who are you? What was this?
I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that was the How the Race Was Won podcast.